Dialogue Ireland, October 2001. Panel discussion, tape number 4.
Early days, so that'll be interesting.
Okay, I'll go ahead.
Yeah.
Hello everybody, how are you? My name is Gerry Kerr. I was with Tony Quinn 1973 to 79. I was very highly involved at that time. Mike asked me, I rang up Joe Duffy about 6 months ago, and Mike asked me, criticising Tony Quinn and explaining my involvement in the organisation, and Mike asked me to come along and just share briefly with you what I went through. I know Caroline and Paddy are going to share more recent experiences, so I'd ask Pat to keep me in order if whatever, is it 20 minutes roughly or 15?
I'd say 15.
15, well 15. I haven't anything prepared. I hope it's a break from this morning, that it'd be more informal, and please, if anybody wants to ask me a question, if they could, if there's anything specifically you'd like to ask about my involvement or any part of the yoga from my experience, I'd be more than willing to answer it. When I got involved, I was quite sick myself with chronic bronchitis, and I was quite all over the place, you could say, as a 21-year-old. I was desperately searching for meaning. I had a sister who died tragically. I wanted to know what life was about, and I wanted to know it desperately. It was a philosophical search and a religious search, spiritual search for me. I went along to Tony Quinn's classes first. I found that the exercises, the deep breathing and the diet helped. Because of that, I felt a great sense of relief, because I was getting healthier, and I became more involved then in the meditation, the mantras, the past life, the canvassing. After 6 months of the courses were sold at that time that after 6 months, if you stayed for 6 months in Bagot Street there every Friday night, you'd have your aura changed to white and gold like Tony's. There was a full chart of all the different colours of auras, and I had bits of green, God knows what. But I'd get it changed to gold and white if I stayed the course. I stayed the course, I diligently did everything, had my aura changed, went into my past lives. Then I took the big step of leaving my job. I was a teacher. I'd been a newly qualified teacher, to go full-time to work for Tony Quinn. Tony Quinn was a neighbour of mine, not far from me. He lived down in Stony Batter. He was maybe 7 years older than me. I didn't know him growing up, and I got to know Tony extremely well. I would have regarded him as a big brother, as well as being a reincarnation of Jesus Christ. My whole life revolved around Tony Quinn and the yoga and the people in it. The people in it I found to be very nice people. Just here today, I've spoken to somebody who is sympathetic towards Tony Quinn's yoga. I've spoken to somebody else who seems to have suffered horrific pain with their daughter, and would have had the opposite experience. My experience was almost totally exploitative, apart from the physical changes that happened that helped me, of the diet. Now, if I could explain briefly maybe the sort of regime that we followed once you got into the house and once you gave up your job. You were told by an intimate of Tony, and unfortunately they were usually women, and I don't want to go into that whole side of it, but there was a whole area there that I found difficult in retrospect to understand, that Tony was a reincarnation of Jesus Christ. It was accepted by all the people around me that he was, to the extent that our past lives were told to us. I was healed by Jesus, and in a life after that I was a monk and I'd committed suicide, seemingly. Peter was there. St. Peter was in the next room to me, flatmate. Of course, Moses was there. He was another healer. You could go, St. John was there. The whole thing revolved around this, and it was, everybody knew more or less their past lives, where they'd been. Everybody knew what Tony was. Now, Tony had said to me, and I'd seen it in his meditation book, that he is, I am the greatest healer ever, was written in his meditation book. We had discussed what was going to happen, and what what was generally held then among us was that Tony Quinn this time was going to realise himself, and it would be harder this time because he had sexual desire to cope with. The last time as Jesus, he did not have sexual desire to cope with. And this, one of his followers one night around the table said, it's going to happen in the Bahamas. Now I'm going back 25 years ago when this was said. This was before the Bahamas, and Tony agreed, yes, that must have come to you in meditation. It's going to happen in the Bahamas at a later date. What it involved for me was going over to London to try and start classes with Tony there. I would work from 9 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock at night leafleting. Every single penny I had, in terms of, I took my pension out of the teaching, I've been a number of years at it, I took out. Tony thought I needed a change of image, so he brought me into the best shops in London, and he told me what clothes to wear. I had no sexual experience, I was very young and innocent, so he brought me to a brothel. Luckily, nobody was there. I think they thought we were detectives, and as you can see, I was totally into Tony Quinn. Whatever he said to me was be good for me. I'd be inclined to go along with it. I canvassed here at home. When I was here at home, I would canvass. I would stand with the banner in O'Connell Street, which included topics like reincarnation, and then Tony Quinn decided to take that off because he thought it wasn't a good advertisement. I'm rambling now. That was basically my involvement there now. A full-time involvement, going around the country, going to try and canvassing in all various towns around the country, with a group of people who I thought were very nice for the most part. Then the crunch came for me in 1979 because my father, I was an only child for most of my life. I had a sister who died tragically, but my father became very ill. He got cancer, and I decided to go home to help my mother, and it was full 24-hour care over a 4-month period. And it hit me then, a number of things hit me at once. One, I had the love of my life was in the yoga, and of course I was dropped there. I was number one clanger because I was outside the fold. Of course, all the friends, including Tony and all the rest, once I left the house, I'd been living in Howth and I'd been living in London with Tony in an apartment. One side, and by the way, I'd done things like 10-day distilled water fasts, 3 months on fruit. I'd done anything that needed to be done, I'd done. The only thing I missed was a 40-day fast, at which I remember one person who's been mentioned here today developed double vision. But all these things I'd done. But then when I went home to my dad to look after him and my mum, I felt outside the fold. But I was still determined to return. But one event happened to me, and just bear with me for a minute while I tell you this, because it happened to me that the day before my father died, I was in the bedroom next door, and at the end of my bed I just saw what appeared to be the spirit of my father, and he came up and put his hand on my head, and immediately I broke down crying. And there was a sense of forgiveness from my father. I had hurt my mum and dad, not purposely, but by being involved in this. And there was a tremendous sense of forgiveness and of peace. And all I had been searching for in those few moments came to me. And from that point on, even though I did try to get back to the yoga, I seemed protected, and my life took a totally new turn. Now, I got into charismatic renewal. I made some friends I still have. I went to mentally handicapped teaching, and I realised, like educo is mentioned here, you know, to bring out. Like, I realised the wisdom that was in that type of child, the beauty that was in that child. I realised grace, if you like. not having to lift myself up by my own bootstraps, not effort on a constant treadmill where you just basically end up penniless, with all you have is the shirt on your back and a belief in Tony Quinn. I had gone to Tony just before my father had died. I'd explained the whole thing. He had said he'd give healing blasts and all this type of thing. I went back to him and he couldn't remember me telling him that my father was sick. So these things struck home. The penny began to drop. So from that point on, I felt I was guided, I was protected by the Holy Spirit, if you like. And since then, soon after, a number of years after, I met my wife, very happily married, 2 beautiful children, and extremely happy. Now, I also happen to be going blind. I've had to retire last year. I've less than 10% vision. Now, you may think with those various difficulties that I might be prompted back to a quick fix, such as Tony Quinn or whatever. But the spirit that I experienced there was a spirit of power, I believe, and the spirit, power and ego and money. Now, the spirit I experienced through my dad and through was one of peace and forgiveness. So I feel very confident where I am, no matter what's wrong with me, and I have no desire to spend a penny, never mind a couple of £100 a week, on his tablets or on his yoga or on anything else to do. So that, if you like, that basically is my experience. I count myself as extremely, extremely fortunate. And if there is anything possible that I can do for other people who have children or who may themselves be involved in it, I would be only too willing to do it, to help them.
Well done. Well, no, there was a great sincerity in what we've just heard, and we asked Paddy and Caroline Rivens to I don't know, but you're a couple together.
We are.
Yes.
Yeah.
So take it as you want to.
Right, well maybe I'll say a few words, and I'm very, very nervous. I've never spoken in public before. In '95 I had 2 serious operations, and as a result of that I ended up having 6 anaesthetic in 5 months, and that totally interfered with my sleep pattern. It's not that I couldn't sleep, I'd just wake up at night time and I couldn't breathe. I'd be sweating, I'd be really panicky. And this went on for 5 years, and I went to a doctor who was a hypnotherapist, and that seemed to work for a while. But then the panic attacks returned, and would happen maybe 17 times a night, maybe 25 times a night. And I refused to go back on sleeping tablets. So when I saw Tony Quinn's thing being advertised in the Evening Herald, I thought this might be an answer for my problem. So I went along anyway, and I was sold on it the first night. I thought, gee, this is it, you know, there is an answer to my problems. So Yvonne was the agent who represented Tony Quinn in the Spa Hotel. And I'd spoken to her a little bit about what was happening to me and my fears as a result of it. And because I used to think at night time I was actually going to die, and it was very traumatic and very stressful. So she said to me, look, go along to the seminar and Tony Quinn will be your saviour. And I remember thinking, well, I only have one saviour, and that's Jesus Christ. But I needed something practical, because I'm a very practical person. So I went along, I borrowed the £15,000, which is money we didn't have. We pretty much at the time lived from day to day, and were managing to pay our bills, but that's all we were able to do. So Yvonne told me to get the money from the credit union or the bank, to say whatever it was that I needed to say to get the 15,000. And to me, the 15,000, while it was a huge, to both of us, it was a huge sum of money. But if it gave me a night's sleep, to me it was going to be worth it, because I'd suffered very badly for about 5 years. And this is only last year I went along to seminars, and this, as I said, Yvonne taught me Tony was going to be my saviour. And she said it so convincingly. So I have a terrible fear of flying. It's a huge fear, and I didn't know how I was going to incorporate two fears to get to Egypt. It was such a long flight. The flight to London wasn't too bad. It was only roughly an hour. But the second flight, I didn't know how I was going to manage it. So Yvonne arranged I go with Marion Ford, that I'd sit beside her on the plane, and this was a jumbo, and I could never figure out how these things could get off the ground. But I was so desperate, I went, and I squeezed the hand off Marion Ford all the way over to Egypt. And when we landed, I was so relieved. We had terrible turbulence on the plane, and when the plane actually landed, I was so relieved I just couldn't stop crying. It was just floods of tears came from me, and I hadn't cried like that for years. And Martin Ford and Marion Ford were standing in front of me, and the two of them completely ignored me. But the names meant nothing to me. Ford's meant nothing to me. I didn't realise they were as high up in Tony Quinn's organisation. So that was that anyway. I went along to the hotel and looked forward to the next morning to see the famous Tony Quinn. I'd heard very, very little about him, but I thought he might have an answer for me, or at least give me some clues as to how to cope with what was happening to me at night time. And I'd made a decision when I went out there that I would take 2 drinks at night so I'd be able to sleep, and that's all I had. So the first morning, I found him interesting in that, but as the second day wore on, I became actually very, very bored with him. And someone told me to go ahead and meet him, to see was there anything in me that maybe Tony could help me along with. So I went along and I met him, and I'd said to him that I was actually quite bored listening to him. And I actually wasn't trying to be funny, but that's genuinely how I felt about it. So apparently I had said something that one should never say to Tony Quinn. And they began to ostracise me after that. I remember going out one night trying to get back the fresh air. There were lovely bungalows we were staying in out in Egypt, very luxurious altogether. I was sharing the room with a stranger, and she was fast asleep, and I was lying awake because after waking up from one of the panic attacks, even though I had taken 2 drinks, and I went out to get a bit of air. But when I went to come back into the room, I was actually locked out of the room. I couldn't get back into the hotel, and the place was the bungalows were all laid out in a maze, and I was always getting lost. I couldn't find my way to the hotel in the dark, even though there was a few lights on. I was afraid to go up to the reception area to get a spare key. But that night I was locked out the whole night. I couldn't get back into the room. And we were warned in the beginning not to make phone calls to home because it would cost around £900 or so, we're told, in phone bills. But I made it a point to phone Paddy to let him know that I'd arrived safely, because he knew how bad I was with fear and flying. And I rang him the second night and I told him I was fed up and that I was bored with the whole thing, and I just saw the whole thing as a con and I wanted to get back home. And I became very caught up with wanting to get back home. And he said to me to go and see somebody there to see could they fly me back. But actually what they ended up doing was putting me into a mental home. It was about, I have a lot of blocks about it. It was about I think it was the first week or the second week, I'm not sure. I think it was the first week. Yvonne came over from Dublin to me, and I was changed to another hotel that took me away from everybody else. While I was in that first hotel, they'd removed the bedclothes. They'd taken the other woman out of the room and left me without my clothes. I just had my nightdress and my dressing gown. Even the sheets, down to the sheets in the bed, were removed. And I hadn't a clue what was going on. I became very mixed up and very disorientated. So they moved me to another hotel. I don't know why they did that with Yvonne. And I think it was the next day this white van came along for me. I didn't know where I was going or what I was doing. Yvonne was in the van with me, so I felt reasonably safe. So it ended up they were taking me to a mental home, to a lock-up unit over in Egypt, and it was one of the worst experiences of my life. I was terrified there. I had no contact with Paddy, I had no contact with Yvonne, I had no contact with anybody that I knew or anything that was familiar. And the hospital itself was quite frightening because there were patients there who were really very, very unwell. And Yvonne tried to imply that I had nervous breakdowns before, and I'd never had a history of nervous breakdowns or anything like it. I mean, yes, I had a fear of flying, but that was my biggest fear. So just to go back to Tony Quinn for a minute, during the seminar he came out once to go to the loo, and I remember loads of the women saying there, "My God, Tony Quinn is after going to the loo." And I said, "Yeah, of course he did, he's only human, he needs to pee, like everyone else needs to pee." But I couldn't get over people's attitude towards him. To me, he was just a man who might have had an answer or two for me, to help me with the sleep pattern. But they saw him as a god and I think that's why they were so amazed when he actually needed to pee. But when I came back, I don't remember the flight back because I was doped on tablets. But I ended up having to spend 8 weeks in hospital being treated for a nervous breakdown. So that was a year ago, and I've grown stronger. Paddy got in touch with my guard here. Mike was a tremendous help to both of us. I've grown a lot stronger, and I'm just glad to be able to come along here today and talk to you. A lot of it I don't remember, but I'm only trying to tell you the bits that I do recall. So I'll leave it at that.
If that's your first time, it was just great. Paddy, do you want to add on to that? Your point of view?
I suppose my point of view, there isn't really a lot I can add. There are some parts of what happened, Caroline, out there. She has obviously forgotten about, but rather than me hinge on them, from my point of view, I mean, our initial contact with the Tony Quinn organisation was, as Caroline said, it was when Caroline saw the ad, and she went along to the Success for Living 6 weeks course. Saw nothing unusual about the whole thing at all. In fact, my curiosity got the better of me, and I actually went and signed on for another different 6 weeks course elsewhere, and did go along to it. And I must say that I was startled by the antics of the people who were directly connected with Tony Quinn. They would be brought in about the third week, and they would be put, you go through the usual sort of, this guy would talk you through what was this Successful Living was about, and a lot of the stuff that Father Louis spoke about, and some of the stuff that Gerry spoke about were part of it, and indeed what Dr. Collins was saying earlier on were very evident to me. Now, at this point, I signed up on this one. This was a different course. It was towards the end of the course that Caroline was on. She didn't even get the full stretch on that course before the whole thing of going to Egypt came up, and it came up very quickly. And when it was discussed, and we always discuss things at home, when it was discussed, we were sitting down at dinner one night, and myself, the two sons of Caroline, and it came up, and we looked at each other and we thought, this won't happen, because we had stopped going on foreign holidays because Caroline had such a fear of flying, and we got used to the idea of just holidaying around Ireland anyway, so it wasn't a big deal. So we actually, myself and the two sons, actually placed a bet about this whole thing. It wouldn't happen. I said, I said it'd probably go down to the wire. That Caroline would probably go as far as the airport. I would have to go out with her, I knew that. And that would be it. So we actually, there was a bet of about 50 quid. And we thought no more of it. It was that was simply that, like. And even that morning, when Caroline did go, when I brought her to the airport, and we were standing in the airport, some of the things that I was observing unnerved me slightly, but I was quite confident that I would either end up going back home and then would have to come back. So I had made my mind up, okay, we're going to be inconvenienced somewhat in the day, but this is the way it would go. And there was nothing, nobody could have told me that Caroline was going to fly. I knew her too well. So I had actually gone home and I got a phone call from Caroline. She did a run around the airport, as we said, like, and she was out somewhere, some part of the airport having a cigarette, but I come out and take her home. So one of my sons worked with me, and I rang him and I says, I won the bet, I'm going back out to pick up Caroline. So when I went out, I was actually driving out when I got another call, and it was Caroline's number came up on the phone, but it was Gerry that actually spoke to me. And she says, Paddy, she says, were you coming out to collect Caroline? I said, I am, yeah. I says, well, she said, we couldn't find her, but we've located her. She said, it's okay. I said, well, let me speak to Caroline. And Caroline spoke to me, and I said, no, I'll go on anyway. I'll keep going. The call went dead, and I was going through the toll bridge when I got another call, and it was Caroline, and she said, no, it's okay, I'm going. And I thought, oh, shit, I've lost 50 quid. I got her. So I was flummoxed about the whole thing, and it threw me. I couldn't weigh it up. I couldn't figure out how she would manage to fly. And I said, even if she did take a drink, she didn't have time at that stage to get a drink. So as a transport, Caroline did go, but she rang me when she got there, and then she rang me the second night, and she said, this is a con of major proportions. And she said, what can I do? And I said, well, look, what you can do is go see whoever it is that's in charge over there. Who did you go with? Who was in charge? Who seemed to be sort of running the thing? Because from what I could gather in the airport, this woman Yvonne and somebody else were there, but they weren't going, but they were being handed over to another group in London. So I said, well, see them, tell them you want to come back. It's as simple as that. And that was the last I heard from Caroline. A couple of days went by, I hadn't heard anything else, so I rang Yvonne's number because it was really advertised in the papers, and I had the number and I rang it. And she says, oh Jesus, she says, what are we going to do? And I ended up trying, I was ringing this person to, if you like, to either tell me what was happening and at least give me some degree of if you like, comfort or whatever, in terms of she's okay, but this is what's happening. In fact, what happened was I was trying to bloody well calm this woman down to make some sense of what was happening. So she said, well, I'm going out. She said, I'm on my way actually, I'm in London. I'm going out. She says, Caroline lost it out there. I said, I beg your pardon, she lost it? What do you mean? I don't know, but I'll ring you when I get there, and I can tell you that apart from one call that I made to Eccles Street, and that call was returned by Aidan Cowan, after that, the level of contact was zilch. There was no explanations as to what had happened. We were left in the dark for the course of 12 days when I was handed a zombie at Dublin Airport. And by this Yvonne woman and I forget the other woman's name. She was supposed to be their business manager in Ireland, Tony Quinn's business manager in Ireland. But what I did find out from them was that Caroline had panicked. She wanted to come home, they didn't want to let her home. They kept her away from the others. As it transpired through the help of Mike, we discovered from Caroline when she eventually got out of hospital at home, what the events that did transpire over there. And when we did the interview with TV3, part of the interview was there was a question I wanted to ask these people was if they could so readily take 15,000 from anybody to go on this, could they explain a couple of things to me? Number one, how the hell did they manage to persuade Caroline at Dublin Airport? When I know, and a couple of other people that know us very well would have said, there's no way you couldn't, all the money in the world wouldn't get her on a plane. You couldn't get her drunk enough to go. If they could persuade her at Dublin Airport to go, that everything was so kosher to go, why the hell couldn't they have taken into consideration these were supposed to be so-called caring people and get her home? It seemed to me to be the logical thing to do. If she's going to be a problem to them, get her out. Fair enough. That's, you know, that was it. But no, they didn't. They took her and they dumped her into a mental home. And I'm sorry, this is where I think of your words earlier on. You literally disarmed me. I thought it was unfair, to say the least, because I want, there's a bigger part of me who wants to throttle Tony Quinn and Martin Ford and a few others.
Paddy, tell them about last Christmas. Looking at the GPO.
Oh yeah. I was meeting actually a journalist friend of mine at the GPO just after Christmas. I was working in town and I was standing at the corner of, I think it's Pennies, it used to be Pennies, on that street down beside the GPO. And I was getting impatient waiting on Charlie to come from the Independent, and it was a Saturday afternoon, and I turned sharply to walk down and I literally knocked Tony Quinn off his feet. I couldn't believe it. It was my luck or my bad luck to meet this guy at this point in time in my life. But I literally wanted to. I would have happily done murder, done time for murder there and then. But at that stage, Caroline was just after getting out of hospital, and I can assure you that the biggest concern for me was, well, if I do what I want to do to this guy right now, I mean, fate is a funny way of throwing things up at you, but this was weird. This was absolutely weird. The very one person that I was hoping to set about bringing down, I literally physically knocked down on the street in Dublin. But I had to override that at that point in time in my life. But I suppose for me, if there was anything I wanted from here today, it was the hope that there were other people would be here today who were either affected by him directly or were members of family who were affected in some way by him, because I personally believe that the only way that his organisation can be taken to task on this is by a group of us getting together and taking some sort of a class action to try and redress the damage that he has done. So, I mean, I'm sorry, it doesn't go away. That's about as much as I can pull together at this stage.
Thank you. Are you open to answering any questions that people might want to ask?
Yeah.
We've got 10 minutes, so it's over to yourselves now.
Gerry, while people are formulating that, you did mention the fact that you also, not only did you go to London with Tony, but you also, wasn't he studying to be an osteopath at that time, or neuropath or something like that?
Yeah, that's what we went over for. We went over to study Martin Ford, myself, Tony, went over to study osteopathy in the College of Osteopathy there. Now, Martin went on to qualify, I think it was a 4-year course, but I had to finance myself by working as a milkman and various other things, as well as going to the as had Martin, mind you, as well as going to the course, and it wasn't working for me. Tony was just free, Tony Quinn was free to go to the course, but how can I'm trying to be objective. Tony was not academic, and it's quite obvious, you know. So that's why, with great surprise, Tony gave it up after a couple of months. Yeah. So I don't want to say any more than that, really. I don't want to.
A number of Tony Quinn's qualifications that he labels are awarded to him by organisations which have been established by some of his own organisation. I think if you look very closely at his Mr. Ireland title as well, there's a similar story.
Yes.
There as well.
I don't know whether the chairman can ask questions, but I was fascinated when you said that you were bored, because the picture we were getting this morning was of this very charismatic person, almost hypnotic personality, taking people in. And even Gerry, was devoting his life to him for those years. But you go out, you're desperate, you're looking for an answer, and you're bored stiff. Now, I think feelings like that are very revelatory. You see, I've just been interested, normally in counselling and therapy, you'd say boredom sometimes is anger, that it's a form of resistance, that you get a feeling, well, this isn't working for me, it's not going to work for me, and I feel so angry, I will switch off, and I'm bored stiff. Another reason people can get bored is that their antennae are telling them, this is baloney, and it's just not interesting. It's a phony, frothy nothing, and so I'm bored. But maybe I don't know. When you look at your feelings and say, why was I so bored? Can you put your finger on it?
Tony was constantly repeating the conscious, unconscious attention, but to me, I was looking for the answer. I thought he'd be able to offer something in general that I could pick up, but Tony kept repeating the same things over and over again.
So you felt it just wasn't relevant
It did nothing.
where you were concerned?
It would be of no benefit to me whatsoever.
Yeah.
And I found even his voice very, very monotonous, and I couldn't understand why people were so in awe of him.
So it's not what you do when you're hypnotising people, you get that monotonous tone of voice. That's part of the
Well, I didn't
technique.
realise that, you see.
But the other thing I was interested, when you went to the hospital, they committed you to the hospital.
Yvonne committed me to
Yeah,
this.
and there was no, I mean, in medical terms, there was no consultation with Paddy or anybody.
No, nothing.
Now, did anyone from the organisation come to see you when you were in the hospital?
No. Nobody
So you
came
were
to see me.
abandoned?
Totally, with complete strangers.
I actually,
I'm just wondering on that point, would that person be legally allowed to do that? Because normally, as you say, Father, normally it has to come for a medical doctor, or it has to be the consent of the husband or the wife, whoever might be the situation is, to admit their family member into a mental institute. I'm just wondering, that's one point. And secondly, did you ever consider taking legal action against that person? I mean, whether you want to do it or not, but I'm just wondering what are the legal, points of view on that?
Well, first and foremost, I needed to get well when I came back, and that has taken me the full year to entirely get over it, well, as much as I can, But certainly in the near future, I would look at that. I would definitely look at that, for my own sake, and for Paddy's as well.
Yeah, because each country have their own, standard rules and laws, and I'm surprised that the institute over there allowed a third party to, under their word, to have you admitted.
We did try to find out how they managed to do that without my family's consent, but we've been told to contact the embassy that they don't want to get involved. The hospital doesn't want to get involved with us.
How did you get out of the hospital?
That I don't know. I think the time came for me to be flown home.
what happened was this Yvonne Sherry was sent out to, they saw her as being a confidant from the short period of time they had established contact prior to going, any of this came up. So she was shipped out to either calm Caroline down and get her to comply with what was going on. This is what I managed to glean from the period. But when that didn't work, she said, this is Yvonne Sherry said to me on the phone after she'd come back, well, we decided to fly her home, but Caroline attacked me in the airport. And apparently you don't become anyway physical, you know, or violent in Egypt. I don't know, I've never been there. It drew the attention of the security people. And that's how she ended up. This was her reasoning for Caroline ending up in the mental institution. So in coming home, she had to come back. They had to bring her back because it was known that she went out with them. This is all I can come up with. So what they did was, rather than bring her back with everybody else, they brought her back a day earlier. So when she did come back, she was in a very, very doped state. It wasn't for a week afterwards that the worst of what happened and all that did happen manifested itself in its worst forms for Caroline, and she subsequently ended up in 2 hospitals here in Dublin for 8 weeks. But I'm trying to get an answer from anybody in the Quinn organisation to a question like that.
Presumably you got no money back.
Oh, I stopped the money.
Did you?
Yeah, we
I stopped the check.
managed to do that.
Oh, that was fortunate.
We got no money.
After that, when I had no contact, I rapidly had to sort of put the bits and pieces about what was happening. You know, I mean, while I went along out of curiosity myself to these 6 weeks, 2-hour things advertised in the hotels around Dublin and the rest of the country, when I saw the way they introduced people who'd been out there and who had been successful and the manner in which they were behaving, 2 things happened for me, and one was I can either attack somebody here over Caroline when she was still out there, and bear in mind she was out there, I had no contact, or I can try and find out as much as I can about them. So I choose the second route. And I went along to their courses, and I went along with a...
Even though you'd stopped the check?
Even though I'd stopped the check. But nobody challenged me
Yes.
on the question of the check. And in fact, at one stage, Yvonne didn't seem to know what was happening, and that end of things was guaranteeing me not only the money back, but the next trip was in November of last year, and I was getting a 2 weeks VIP treatment course, free of charge.
There's been a number of cases where people have challenged the organisation, and rather than have a confrontation with them, they would give back the money because it's easier to rather than have that person challenge them face to face in front of everyone else within the organisation, you just give them the money and let them go, and thereby you're quelling their arguments and quelling their confrontation very quickly. And if you're making £1 million a month, you can afford to give back 15,000.
There's just one person.
Certainly, yes.
No, I had a similar experience. I could really say it was Caroline. I went to the Bahamas, and after 3 days I had a massive breakdown over there. I was also locked up for 3 days in the asylum over there. So I can sympathise with where you're coming from. And I agree with Paddy. I think that, you know, if something can be done, I think that it's just really beneficial because you know, I'd hate to see it happen to somebody else.
Do you remember Richard spoke this morning about regulatory controls? See, I think that often anger you could feel like killing somebody, and I could understand that feeling, but often the anger is better channeled into constructive ways of slowly tackling a thing that you feel is out of control. And it would strike me, now from my background in counselling and spiritual direction and stuff, that it would be utterly irresponsible to be taking people who are on the edge in terms of mental health and having them going over an edge, maybe having a breakdown, and no psychiatrist to check them out. There's no kind of expert supervision. And that certainly a body like that is not acting in a professional manner, even remotely. And it seems so strange that if a kid falls off a seat in the toilet in a school, there will be a legal action immediately that it wasn't properly supervised, and there'll be a big settlement over it. And I'm not necessarily against that, but these things are, in comparison, much bigger and much more significant, and there doesn't seem to be any regulation whatsoever.
Just from a regulatory point of view, the Irish law is pretty unique in the fact that at 18 is the cut-off point. There is nothing, there's no regulatory power to change that. There's no prima facie cases where something has happened to an individual over that we can sue an organisation. That's where the weakness in the regulatory system. And as for the Mental Health Act, the Mental Health Act, in order to get somebody committed to a psychiatric institution, it requires 2 individual psychiatrists and the family doctor and the consent of 1 family member. And that might change. It changes, I know, in Islamic countries they're radically different because they go back to a format that we're not in. But in the European Union, it's more or less the same because we're governed by European law. But an awful lot of the laws are flawed, even in the United States, which is a much more litigant type state. To fight these organisations, you're talking vast sums of money. There is no prima facie case here. To go to the High Court, you need a war chest of at least 250,000 before you consider it. And it could be a 3-year process at the rate the court is there. At the end of that, you've got to say, what is your return? What are you looking for? Are you looking for money? Are you looking for justice? Are you looking for love? They're the 3 questions you have to ask yourself as a legal person. It's very, very difficult. It's very fine to say you're looking for legislation, but you have to know what you're looking for. If you go to the High Court, the remedy for what you're looking for is damages, which is money. It's not changing the Constitution or the law, the point of law that you're looking for. You have to look to the Supreme Court for that, and that is
You seem to know about the law. Can I ask you, would the Bahamas law and Egyptian law apply when the person's out of the country?
No.
Or does European law still apply because on a European course that happens to be in Egypt or happens to be in the Bahamas?
Let's check your switching here.
Can we perhaps leave that point, because if we look at the next section, we are dealing with legal issues, and we have a solicitor present with us who has been advising Dialogue Ireland on this point. And could we thank Pat and the panel for the excellent experiences we've heard, because we've always had this element in our conference to have the stories, and so could we all give them a real... So we will be dealing with that, but just to, folks, the next section, there's 2 options, and for some people it will be the pastoral support for people affected by involvement with Tony Quinn, support groups, legal issues, spiritual aspect, and counselling. So, and then for some of you who may not be interested in that, are there anybody who would just like to go and watch? There are 2 videos which we have on the Tony Quinn organisation. Would anybody be interested in those? If they're not, then obviously we can all stay here. But would there be anybody who wouldn't be, you'd like to go to that? Great. A couple of people would. As would you mind? Do you know where it's in the theology room? The video is actually in the machine, and the second one is there. So they're about half an hour.